Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands on Podfic. This is the continuation of Keep Your Friends Close, As for Your Enemies. This will be Part 3, Chapter 3, entitled Act 3. 4 days until deadline, 5:59 p.m., 18 degrees Celsius. Hello, Class 1A and Mei Hatsume. This is an announcement from your principal. Am I a dog? Am I a mouse? Am I a bear? Who knows? But a surprise amendment has been made to the rules of the Urban Warfare Unit. Izuku whipped around to face the speaker, stopping dead in a near-empty hallway. It was late enough that everyone else had left. It was just him and the amber light streaming through the windows. Principal Nezu's voice chattered out tinily from the small steel box in the wall, and Izuku felt a strange urge to throw something at it. Instead, he glared into the nearest security camera, trying to fathom why Nezu had thought it a good idea to change the rules the night before the exam. Goodness, he should be sleeping right now. He'd slept for most of the day in preparation for the long 3 days ahead, but he needed all the rest he could get. Due to a series of revisions to the exam, a new rule has been implemented. The leaders of both teams cannot be evicted from the game until 8 p.m. on the third night. They may still be kidnapped and can still negotiate a surrender, but they remain in play until they are properly killed after this time. Taking a moment to mull that over, he smiled, nodding his head in thanks. This was a gift, not the Pandora's box he was expecting. He'd been worrying about a solution to that issue for a while now, and Nezu had placed it folded neatly into his lap. It was also proof that Nezu had been watching him carefully over the course of the planning period. Even now, wandering through a deserted hallway at 6 o'clock in the evening, Nezu had been watching him enough to know which speaker to project his message through. Izuku got the sense for the first time since the exam was announced that maybe he was selected to be the ringmaster for a reason other than Kachan being the keystone. If Nezu was watching him, Nezu expected something from him. And damn it all, Izuku was going to give it to him. Thank you, he mouthed at the camera, bowing slightly. The red light on the corner of it blinked, and it was all Izuku needed. Don't waste this. 4 days until deadline, 5:59 p.m., 18 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, the hero team was in shambles. What are we going to do now? Ashido had slammed her hands on the desk, acid threatening to seep from her palms. This ruins everything, several voices yelled in agreement. I agree that it was unprofessional to change the rules with such short notice. Tanya gestured wildly, trying desperately to think of a course of action, especially considering our plans. I mean, this is UA. It was only a matter of time before they sprung something like this on us. Ojiro fiddled with his tail, nervously. He had a point, of course. This was exactly in character for Nezu. Everyone, shut the hell up! Bakugo yelled, and at once, the room descended into near silence. This screws with our plan, yeah. Fucking sucks. Doesn't mean that we have to change anything. The room burst into another uproar, and Bakugo silenced them again with a small explosion and a yell. Tanya thought so much shouting and swearing was unbecoming of future heroes and kept quiet. Lead by example. Yeah, it's annoying, but we just have to keep the act up. The whole point of this operation is to stop Deku from getting desperate and lashing out. Nezu's just given him another edge. His eyes pierced everyone in the room. We can use that. Make him get complacent. Then we strike, just like we planned. When Tanya had first heard of the choice to make Bakugo the keystone, he'd been unsure, doubtful even. His temper was too much, his main strategy, get in there and blow it up. Now, though, being the keystone, although it probably had more to do with Midoriya being his foe than anything, had brought out a calmer, more calculating side of him. He was leading with his head, not just his fists, and Tanya finally understood what Nezu was getting at, putting him in the position he was in. Bakugo was, although Tanya loathed to admit it, being a better leader than him, flexible, objective, adaptable. Now that he was actively thinking about how to outsmart his opponent, he was thinking up strategies Tanya would have never dreamed of following through before he had actually gotten to UA. He had gained the grudging respect of everyone in his team, and Tanya was going to stick by that, even if he disagreed with his strategy. That is a very logical decision, Bakugo. The rest of the team agreed. 11 days until deadline, 3:59 p.m., 24 degrees Celsius. Nemuri marked a small tick on the essay that she was marking, nodding her head in approval. Yes, art has become more varied in its viewpoints on hero society. Toward the beginning, about a decade after the Quark Wars, heroes were heralded and much more often displayed in an interesting blend of Renaissance and Romantic style, typically with the art on the time reverting back toward more realistic depictions. In the past decade, however, this art has shifted to more to the taste of the 21st century and has more cynical ideals to match, playing with the line between heroism and villainy, more abstracted conclusions and more nuanced questions. Look, the student has even linked that back to the art earlier on, and the small subculture that was more uncertain and depicted in heroes in a very similar way. I love it. When students pay attention in art history, they barely ever... A hesitant knock on the door interrupted Nemuri's thoughts. She slipped back into her hero persona, crossing her legs, straightening her shoulders, and lifting her chest just a smidge. "Come in." To her surprise, a tangled mop of green hair made itself known. Wasn't he planning for the urban warfare unit? This probably had something to do with that, then. Well, at least it was Midoriya, not some annoying student who thought of her as some thirst trap with no real teaching or heroic. "I'm sorry to disturb you." "Not at all." Nemuri capped her pen and moved her marking to the side, gesturing for him to sit on the chair across from hers. "It's my job as a teacher to help, so what can I help you with?" If Nemuri was expecting him to come around that day, she was certainly not expecting him to pull out a makeup kit and several brushes. "Could you please teach me makeup?" Nemuri grinned, turning her head. "Hizashi, we have a kit to make over." Hizashi's head popped out from behind the doorframe in excited confusion. Nemuri would have laughed if there wasn't a student present. "I'm happy, but why?" "It's for the assignment." Izuku grinned, and with a jolt, Nemuri realized that that was Shota's grin. "But still, may as well have some fun with it." "Oh? Fun?" "Well, no villain speech is really a villain speech without a certain level of dramatic flair." And oh, had she had this kid pegged wrong? She thought he was normal. "Dramatic flair?" She shared a conspiratorial smirk with Hizashi. "You pick the right teachers." 4 days until deadline, 9:25 p.m., 15 degrees Celsius. Katsuki stared at the clock next to his bed. He used to have an analog one before the ticking annoyed him so much that he broke it one morning. The numbers on it glared back at him, red and unyielding. He resisted the urge to punch it instead, rolling over onto his back. But no, the blaring red bars of light had been the only thing keeping him from thinking about curly green hair, obsessive scribbling in a tattered notebook, a low, fast mutter that put most rappers to shame. Fuck it. Sleep wasn't coming any time soon. If ignorance wouldn't bring him sleep, he'd just have to face the problem head on. So, Deku. He was fighting him. Over the course of the next 3 days. He'd fought the nerd before. What was so different? Right. He'd always fought him head on his own terms. This was a battle of wits and strategic genius, which was Deku's specialty. So he was out of his turf. So what? He'd just have to deal with it and push on. Why was this bothering him so much? Because you know what he could do. That made Katsuki sit up. He was scared. Scared of Deku. That's a whole other problem that he could not afford to solve right then. But was scared the right word for the situation? After all, he wasn't scared of Deku. He was threatened by the idea of him getting desperate, of using his brain in conjunction with his brawn, something Katsuki himself struggled with. Not that Katsuki could struggle with things, no, not at all. He was too strong for that. He had to be. Honestly, Katsuki had a lot more things to work out with Izuku than just that, but he needed sleep. He had a big 3 days coming up after all. He rolled over again, this time determined to get himself rested for tomorrow. It is with this final decision that he fell into an uneasy, turbulent sleep. 4 days until deadline, 9:59 p.m., 14 degrees Celsius. Izuku tugged his hoodie tighter around him, absent-mindedly glancing over at Hatsume. It was getting colder, and he was lucky that he had thought of making the villain costumes warm. The cold could be a real concern if it got bad enough, and Izuku was just glad that they would be prepared for it. The villain team had been granted access to ground Epsilon early to set up, and he had sent Shinso, Shoji, Jiro, Tokiyami, Hagakure, and Yaoyorozu back to their respective dorms to get some rest before the exam. He and Hatsume had slept during the day, but their exam started at 10 p.m. It was going to be a long 3 days. Izuku just hoped that they'd get through it intact. With a near-silent click, the light in front of them had switched from red to green, and the side gate swung open. Between him and Hatsume, bringing in their weapons and supplies wouldn't be too much of an issue, but they still needed the time to set up. Using one for all for the heavier lifting made things quicker, of course, even though Izuku could have gotten them in without it. The villain costumes he and Hatsume had made were warm to combat the forecasted chill, but not too hot as to become unbearable during a fight. They consisted of a dark hoodie, threaded with Kevlar, and much spider thread as Yaoyorozu could make, armored cargo pants, steel-capped combat boots, and a comm set that could switch between multiple channels. The design on the back of the hoodie, however, was Izuku's favorite part, lacking in functionality as it was. It was detailed embroidery, done by Sudechi, Megami, and Class 1J, in return for a visitor's pass to the viewing stage of the exam. For their exam, management students had to market one of the students from the hero course with a limited amount of information. Passes to the viewing area were highly coveted, and Megami had been more than happy to use her quirk for Izuku's benefit, to get her hands on one. A steampunk-style top hat, upturned into the center of the design, a pair of green bunny ears poking out from the top. Circling it, a lavender cat, a red and black snake, a dark shadow of a bird, a violet fox with headphone jacks trailing from its ears, a gray and pastel hummingbird, and a rust-colored octopus sat with their backs turned. When the others had asked why their backs were turned, Izuku told them that they were protecting the bunny in the top hat. Nobody noticed that the eyes of the 6 animals were shut. Still, costumes aside, it was beginning to get cold. Izuku grabbed the nearest 2 carts, 2 of 7 that they had grabbed to help set up, and started lugging them toward their base. Hatsume glanced over at him, an uncharacteristically thoughtful expression on her face. Why do you think Nezu decided to change the rules so suddenly? Surely it would have made sense to do so earlier. It probably had something to do with seeing how everyone adapted to the change. Sure, it benefited us a lot, but it really threw a spinner in the works for the hero team. You make that sound like changing the rule as part of the exam. Izuku nodded in confirmation. Knowing Nezu, it probably was. Adaptability under pressure is an important skill for heroes to have, and the one issue with a 2-week planning time is that it takes away a lot of the need for flexibility. I wouldn't be surprised if the whole 2 weeks was assessed in some way, shape, or form, if not for our grades, then for something else. Izuku nudged a broken bottle out of the way with his foot as they made their way down one of the more sketchy fake alleyways. Then why not tell us? Because if everyone knew that they were being assessed, can you honestly say that they'd act the same way? Izuku shrugged. Nezu plots and sticks to the shadows. His methods aren't always exactly morally sound, so it makes sense that he'd trick us. To achieve what ends, I can't be sure. Hatsume grinned. Well, that doesn't really matter to me. As long as I get to make my babies, I'm happy. Readjusting his grip on the crate he was carrying, Izuku smiled. And that's what makes you good at what you do. I know. They both doubled back to grab the last few crates. 4 days until deadline. 11:24 p.m., 13 degrees Celsius. Hatsume shook her head, grinning madly, staring at the monitors Izuku just plugged in and started up. This is wild. I know. His grin matched hers. This is going to get absolutely feral. The heroes will have no idea. My babies will cause so much chaos. Hatsume was buzzing with excitement, jumping from foot to foot. I'm glad I get to be a physical part of the exam rather than just watching it. This way, you also get to test your inventions in the field yourself, rather than relying on people who don't know what they're talking about. Me included. Hatsume waved a hand in the air, in the closest thing Hatsume has to a dismissive gesture. You've learned plenty of things about support items in the past few weeks, and you knew so much more than most people to start with. You've certainly made more explosions than anyone else in my class, other than me. Izuku grimaced, laughing. I'm glad you see that as a good thing. I don't think Powerloader agrees. No, he definitely doesn't. Hatsume shook her head. Come on, let's go. We have more babies to set up. Izuku followed her, grinning like a madman. This was going to be fun. 3 days until deadline. 6:32 a.m., 10 degrees Celsius. Finishing the setup for the base had been quick. Midoriya and Hatsume had taken care of the brunt of it the night before. Hitoshi did not envy the lack of sleep, so they sent Hitoshi and Tokiyami out the moment everything was ready to get the first objective over and done with. They planned to do most of the work on the 2nd and 3rd days, but for now, they would attack with a quick first move, and then retreat into obscurity. Withdrawing for the rest of the day would leave the heroes jumpy and panicked, at least that's what Midoriya said. Either way, the heroes had to be on their game, hard and fast, and prepare for a quick attack. Hitoshi shivered against the chill, pulling his hoodie closer around him. He hadn't been allowed to use Aizawa's capture weapon, something to do with non-essential support items, the assholes, and he was realizing more and more how much colder it was without it. Down on the ground it might have been okay, but on the rooftops where he was, battered by the bitter wind, he understood why Midoriya had made the villain costume a hoodie of all things. Damn his intolerance to the cold. Without warning, a crackle came from the comm system behind his ear. Muse, Raven, there's been a surprise change in location. Hitoshi startled, surprised. He looks across at Tokiyami, who only looked back at him, mirroring his expression. Where? This couldn't be good. They were meant to deliver the package that they had to a bot in a specific alleyway at a specific time. If that had changed, there had to be a reason. Midoriya hummed over the comms. Nezu's meddling again. The new location's 2 blocks north, 3 blocks west. Can you make it in time? Hitoshi checked his watch. Yeah, I can make it. With a thought, he tacked on. I might have to rush a little, but we should remain undiscovered. Good. Stay safe. Don't get caught. The comms clicked, signaling that Midoriya was no longer on the line. Hitoshi made eye contact with Tokiyami, who nodded slightly before switching the channel on his comm set. Siren? Code word dastardly. There's been a change in location, Nezu's doing. 2 blocks north, 3 blocks east. If we don't go, they'll get suspicious. We'll move to intercept. Feather, Leap, keep watch from behind to collect. Drop in if needed. On it. We'll switch back to villain comms now. Hitoshi did so, turning back to the frequency Midoriya told them to use. Quietly, Hitoshi and Tokiyami dipped down into the alleyway that was now below them, to encounter an unmoving bot. Tokiyami shot in the back of the head with a paintball as Uraraka dropped down from the apartment building across from them. Hitoshi handed her the package they were to deliver to the robot. Thanks. Hitoshi nodded in reply. He and Tokiyami turned and scaled up the building that they came down from, an old, crumbling thing, starting their way back to the villain base. Hitoshi tapped his comms. The package has been delivered. Thank you, Muse. Hitoshi pursed his lips. He didn't like lying, but this was his mission. He wanted to be a hero. This was it. He was a hero. Midoriya was not his ally here, as much as Hitoshi wanted him to be, as much as he needed him to be. Hitoshi had seen firsthand what kind of crazy things Midoriya would do when desperate. A broken finger, a cloud of dust, a lost match. And he couldn't have that Midoriya coming out during this assignment. You're welcome. All right, listeners. This concludes Chapter 3 of Keep Your Friends Close, As for Your Enemies. Chapter 4 will be next. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Let me know your reactions to this chapter, and as always, thank you so much for listening.